The UHS Defiance moved through the dark void of space like a silver needle threading through black cloth. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the stars through the main viewing screen. His weathered hands gripped the railing as he studied the sensor readings that had appeared just minutes ago. 12 massive shapes were moving toward them from the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant looked up from her console with worry in her eyes. The readings showed ships larger than anything humanity had ever built. Each one was the size of a small city, and they moved with purpose toward the human vessel. She had been monitoring their approach for the past hour, and the alien ships showed no signs of slowing down. Chief Engineer Ryan Hayes climbed onto the bridge from the lower decks. His uniform was stained with engine grease, and his face showed the strain of keeping their experimental engines running smoothly for 3 months. The Defiance was humanity's first real attempt at deep space exploration, and every system was being pushed to its limits. Communications Officer Amanda Price sat at her station trying to make sense of the signals coming from the approaching fleet. The patterns were unlike anything in their databases, but there was clearly intelligence behind them. The signals repeated in complex sequences that suggested language and meaning. Captain Morrison had spent 20 years in Earth's Navy before transferring to the new space service. He had seen combat in 3 different wars and knew the look of predators when he saw it. These ships moved like hunters stalking prey. Their formation was perfect and their approach calculated to intimidate. The alien fleet stopped just outside weapons range and held position. For several minutes, nothing happened except the steady beeping of sensors and the quiet hum of life. Support systems. Then the main screen flickered and changed to show an alien face that made several crew members step backward in shock. General Zethkar was 7 feet tall with gray skin that looked like polished stone. His eyes were completely black and his mouth was filled with sharp teeth that gleamed in the light of his ship's bridge. Scars covered his face and neck, telling stories of countless battles. When he spoke, his voice was deep and commanding. Primitive creatures of the small vessel. I am General Zethkar of the Veltan Empire. You will surrender your ship immediately and prepare to kneel before my authority. Your species will submit to our rule or face complete destruction. This is the only warning you will receive. The bridge of the Defiance fell silent except for the steady beeping of alert systems. Captain Morrison looked at his crew and saw fear in some faces but determination in others. Lisa Grant straightened her shoulders and moved closer to her captain. Ryan Hayes cracked his knuckles and started calculating engine modifications in his head. Amanda Price kept her hands steady on her controls despite the trembling in her arms. Captain Morrison stepped forward until he was directly in front of the main screen. His blue eyes met the alien general's black ones without flinching. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute conviction. General Zethkar, I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the United Human Space Service. I appreciate you taking the time to introduce yourself, but I'm afraid I have to decline your generous offer. You see, we humans have a saying about people who make demands like yours. We tell them they can go straight to hell. The alien general's expression changed from confident superiority to confusion and then to rage. No species had ever refused his ultimatum. 47 different civilizations had knelt before him and begged for mercy. The small human ship should have been broadcasting surrender signals already. You do not understand your situation. We have 12 dreadnoughts and you have 1 primitive vessel. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Continue this foolishness and we will make your entire species suffer. Captain Morrison smiled, but there was no humor in it. The expression reminded his crew why he had earned 3 medals for bravery and a reputation for never backing down from a fight. His next words would be remembered and repeated for generations of humans who came after. General, with all due respect, you can take your ultimatum and shove it where the sun doesn't shine. If anyone's kneeling today, it'll be you kneeling before the graves of your soldiers. Now, if you want to dance, let's dance, but don't expect us to roll over and play dead. The transmission cut off and alarms began sounding throughout the alien fleet. General Zethkar stared at the blank screen in disbelief. In 300 years of military service, he had never encountered a species with such audacity. The humans should be terrified, but instead they were issuing challenges. On the Defiance, Captain Morrison turned to his crew. Lisa Grant was already at her weapons console preparing their limited armaments. Ryan Hayes was routing additional power to engines and shields. Amanda Price was recording everything for transmission back to Earth. The captain's voice was steady. When he gave his orders, all hands to battle stations. Non-essential personnel to escape pods. We're probably not walking away from this one, but we're going to show these bastards what humans are made of. Ryan, I need everything you can give me from those engines. Lisa, target their lead ship and prepare to fire on my command. Amanda, start transmitting everything we've learned back to Earth. The first alien weapons fired moments later. Beams of energy that could melt asteroids lanced toward the human ship. But the Defiance was no longer where the targeting computers expected it to be. Ryan Hayes had pushed the engines past their safety limits, and the ship twisted through space in ways that violated several laws of physics. More weapons fire followed, but the human ship danced between the energy beams, like a fighter dodging punches. The alien gunners had never faced an opponent that moved with such unpredictable patterns. Their computers couldn't calculate firing solutions against a target that seemed to ignore the basic rules of space combat. Captain Morrison gripped his command chair as the ship spun and twisted through impossible maneuvers. The artificial gravity struggled to compensate, and loose objects flew around the bridge. But they were still alive, and that was more than the aliens had expected. The small human ship fired back with weapons that were primitive by galactic standards, but were used with a precision and fury that caught the aliens off guard. The Defiance's plasma cannons punched holes in the lead dreadnought's shields and sent the massive ship reeling. General Zethkar watched his perfectly planned attack dissolve into chaos as one small ship made his entire fleet look foolish. The humans fought like cornered animals, but with the intelligence to make every shot count. For the first time in his long military career, he began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The battle raged for 3 hours, with the small human ship somehow staying alive against impossible odds. Chief Engineer Ryan Hayes had pushed the engines so far beyond their limits that the metal was glowing red-hot in some sections. The ship twisted and spun through space, performing maneuvers that should have torn it apart, but somehow held together through human stubbornness and engineering that refused to quit. General Zethkar stood on his command bridge watching his fleet struggle against a single enemy vessel. 6 of his ships had taken damage from the human weapons, and 2 were reporting system failures. The small ship moved like nothing he had ever seen in 3 centuries of warfare. It danced between his weapons fire as if the pilot could see the future. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant fired the last of their plasma torpedoes and watched them streak toward the alien flagship. The weapons were crude compared to what the enemy possessed, but they carried something the alien technology lacked. They carried the concentrated fury of a species that had never learned the meaning of surrender. The torpedoes struck the Velton flagship and sent shockwaves through its massive hull. General Zethkar was thrown against his command chair as explosions rippled across his ship's armor. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in red warning signals, and damage reports flooded in from every section. Captain Morrison wiped blood from a cut on his forehead and surveyed his bridge. Half the control panels were sparking and smoke-filled the air, but his crew was still fighting. Ryan Hayes was routing power from life support to keep the weapons online. Amanda Price was transmitting their battle data back to Earth. Even as alien jamming tried to block their signals, the alien fleet suddenly stopped firing, and the space around the Defiance became quiet, except for the sound of cooling metal and overworked engines. General Zethkar appeared on the main screen again, but this time his expression showed confusion instead of arrogance. Behind him, smoke and emergency lights painted his bridge in chaos. Human vessel, your resistance is pointless, but your tactics are unlike anything in our databases. What manner of world could produce warriors who fight with such reckless abandon? No civilized species would risk their lives in such meaningless gestures. Communications Officer Amanda Price looked to her captain for permission and received a nod. She activated the transmission array and began uploading data that would change the aliens' understanding of everything they thought they knew about warfare and survival. You want to know about our world? Here's everything you need to know about Earth. The data stream included atmospheric readings that showed oxygen levels that would be toxic to most species. Gravity measurements indicated a pull nearly twice what most civilized worlds considered normal. Weather patterns revealed storms that could level cities and temperature variations that swung from freezing to boiling across different regions. General Zethkar watched the data with growing alarm. The geological surveys showed a world in constant upheaval with volcanoes that regularly reshaped continents and earthquakes that could swallow entire civilizations. The biological records were even more disturbing as they cataloged thousands of species that seemed designed for nothing but killing. Amanda Price continued her transmission with files about human history. Wars that had raged for decades over resources and territory. Plagues that had killed millions but only made the survivors stronger. Ice ages that should have wiped out the species but instead forced them to develop tools and cooperation. We've been fighting for survival since we first stood upright on two legs. Every day on Earth is a battle against something that wants to kill us. The weather, the animals, the diseases, the natural disasters, and each other. We don't know how to quit because quitting means dying and we're too stubborn to die. The Velton computers finished analyzing the Earth data, and the results sent shock waves through the alien fleet. Classification algorithms that had never failed before struggled to process information about a world so hostile that it defied their understanding of habitable planets. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant took over the transmission, and her voice carried the weight of human determination. You think we're reckless because we don't surrender when facing overwhelming odds? But we're not reckless, we're experienced. Every human child learns to evaluate threats and calculate risks because our world is full of things that can kill you in an instant. She transmitted footage of human cities built to withstand hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods. Images of children learning to swim in waters filled with predators. Videos of humans climbing mountains that could kill them with avalanches or altitude sickness just to prove they could reach the top. We don't fight because we're brave. We fight because it's what we've always done. Every generation of humans has faced extinction, and every generation has found a way to survive. We've learned to use everything as either a tool or a weapon because on Earth everything can be both. The alien bridge computers finally finished their analysis, and the results appeared on screens throughout the Velton fleet. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world with environmental hazards, so extreme that most galactic species would consider it uninhabitable. The fact that humans had not only survived but thrived on such a world was unprecedented in galactic history. General Zethkar stared at the classifications in disbelief. Class 12 worlds were considered impossible for complex life. Even the hardiest species in the galaxy required extensive environmental modifications to survive on Class 8 planets. Yet humans had developed spaceflight technology while living on a world that should have killed them millions of years ago. Captain Morrison stepped forward to address the alien general directly. Now you know what you're dealing with. We're not some primitive species you can intimidate into submission. We're survivors from a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we learned how to kill it back. The transmission included files about human military history. Records of battles where small forces had defeated much larger armies through superior tactics and sheer determination. Stories of soldiers who had continued fighting with wounds that should have been fatal. Accounts of civilians who had turned household items into weapons when their homes were threatened. Every human you see before you is the descendant of billions who refused to give up when faced with impossible odds. We're still here because our ancestors learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to make the other guy quit first. General Zethkar felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of conquest. For the first time in his military career, he was genuinely afraid of an enemy. These humans were not just dangerous because of their technology or their tactics. They were dangerous because they came from a world that had taught them that survival required constant vigilance and absolute Determination, the revelation sent ripples of unease through the Velten fleet as ship commanders began to question the wisdom of attacking Deathworlders without proper intelligence gathering. The emergency signal from the UHS Defiance reached Earth just as Admiral Catherine Brooks was finishing her morning coffee at the United Nations Space Command headquarters. The transmission crackled with static from the incredible distance, but the message was clear enough to send ice through her veins. Humanity had made first contact and it had gone very badly. The data package included everything Captain Morrison and his crew had learned about the Velten Empire. Ship specifications that showed technology decades ahead of human capabilities. Tactical analysis revealing a military force that had conquered 47 different star systems. Most terrifying of all was the intelligence that a massive invasion fleet was already heading toward Earth. President William Carter received the emergency briefing at 3 a.m. Washington time. He sat in the Oval Office surrounded by his top advisors and military leaders as Admiral Brooks explained the situation. The alien fleet approaching Earth numbered over 200 ships and would arrive in less than 72 hours. Dr. Helen Wade from the Institute for Xenobiological Studies reviewed the alien biological data with growing excitement rather than fear. The Velten were physically impressive, but their psychological profiles revealed critical weaknesses. They were used to easy victories against species that surrendered quickly when faced with superior technology. General Marcus Stone had commanded ground forces in 4 different conflicts and understood the importance of terrain and psychological warfare. As he studied the alien tactical data, he began to see opportunities where others saw only certain doom. The Velten fought like a conventional military force, which meant they would be unprepared for the kind of warfare humans excelled at. The president addressed in the United Nations Security Council as reports flooded in from observatories around the world. Telescopes were tracking the approaching alien fleet, and the numbers confirmed their worst fears. 237 ships, each larger than the biggest human space station, were heading directly for Earth. Instead of panic, the world leaders responded with grim determination that would have made their ancestors proud. The Chinese representative spoke of their experience fighting against overwhelming odds. During the Second World War, the Russian delegate mentioned the siege of Stalingrad, where civilians had fought with kitchen knives when they ran out of bullets. Dr. Wade presented her analysis of Velten psychology to the assembled leaders. The aliens expected quick surrender followed by orderly occupation. They had never faced a species that would turn their own planet into a weapon or use civilian infrastructure for military purposes. Most importantly, they had never encountered humans who viewed impossible odds as just another Tuesday. General Stone was given overall command of Earth's defense forces and immediately began implementing strategies that seemed insane to conventional military thinking. Instead of trying to match alien technology, he planned to use Earth's hostile environment as a force multiplier. Every natural disaster, every dangerous animal, every toxic substance would become part of their arsenal. Cities around the world began activating emergency protocols that had been developed for the worst-case scenarios. New York's subway system was rigged with explosives that could turn underground tunnels into death traps. London's ancient sewer network became a maze of booby traps and ambush points. Tokyo's earthquake-resistant buildings were modified to collapse in specific patterns that would channel invaders into kill zones. Sam Parker was a former Special Forces operator who now worked as a demolitions expert for a construction company. When the government called for volunteers with his skills, he didn't hesitate to answer. Within hours, he was training civilian crews how to turn everyday materials into improvised explosives and weapons. The team Sam worked with included Maria Gonzalez, a former NASA engineer who understood how to weaponize satellites and communication networks. Her plans involved turning Earth's orbital infrastructure into a massive early warning system and targeting network. Every weather satellite and GPS beacon would become part of the planet's defense grid. Construction crews worked around the clock to implement defensive measures that would have horrified any civilized species. Highway overpasses were rigged to collapse and create obstacles. Office buildings were prepared to become vertical battlefields with every floor designed to slow down invaders. Even playgrounds were modified with hidden weapons. Caches and escape routes. The agricultural regions prepared their own surprises. Farmers who knew every inch of their land began setting traps in fields and forests. Irrigation systems were modified to carry more than just water. Grain silos became observation posts and weapons depots. The people who fed the world prepared to defend it with the same determination their ancestors had shown when protecting their farms from raiders. Emergency broadcasts explained the situation to civilian populations who responded with typical human stubbornness. Instead of evacuating cities, people prepared to fight for their homes. Hardware stores sold out of materials that could be used as weapons. Libraries became tactical planning centers where people researched guerrilla warfare techniques. 8-year-old Emma Watson was watching the news with her parents in their London flat when the alien ultimatum was broadcast worldwide. General Zethkar appeared on every screen on Earth, demanding immediate surrender and threatening total destruction if humans continued their resistance. The little girl listened to the threats with the same expression she used when playground bullies tried to intimidate her. Her father was a veteran who had served in Afghanistan and had taught his daughter that bullies only understood one language. When Emma asked if she could respond to the alien message, her parents agreed, thinking it would help her process the scary situation. They had no idea that her simple words would be picked up by news networks and broadcast around the world. Emma looked directly into the camera with the fearless confidence that only children possess, and delivered a message that perfectly captured humanity's attitude toward the alien threats. My dad says your bullies and bullies need to be punched in the nose. We're not scared of you and we're not going to do what you say. The child's message was rebroadcast across every human communication network and became a rallying cry that summed up humanity's response to the alien invasion. From the halls of government to the smallest rural communities, the message was the same. Earth would not surrender, and its people would fight with everything they had. Admiral Brooks coordinated the final preparations as the alien fleet approached the outer edge of the solar system. Satellites were repositioned to provide maximum coverage of the invasion routes. Military forces took their positions in defensive networks that stretched across continents. Most importantly, the civilian population prepared to become the most dangerous enemy any invading force had ever faced. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether humanity would join the galactic community as free beings, or become slaves to an empire that had never learned the true meaning of resistance. The Velton invasion fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system like a swarm of metal locusts descending on a green field. 237 ships arranged themselves in perfect formation as General Zethkar prepared to demonstrate the price of defying the Velton Empire. He expected the orbital bombardment to break human resistance within hours. The first wave of alien weapons fire rained down on Earth's major cities, but the results were not what the general had anticipated. Instead of devastating explosions and collapsing infrastructure, the energy beams struck deflector shields that had been hastily constructed using principles borrowed from Earth's magnetic field generators. The shields held just long enough for the real surprises to begin. Dr. Rachel Kim had spent the past 72 hours working with teams of scientists around the world to weaponize Earth's natural systems. When the orbital bombardment began, she activated seismic charges that had been placed along major fault lines. Controlled earthquakes sent shock waves through the planet's crust and triggered volcanic eruptions that filled the atmosphere with ash and electromagnetic interference. The alien targeting systems suddenly found themselves trying to lock onto a planet that was actively fighting back. Volcanic ash clouds blocked optical sensors, while electromagnetic storms from the eruptions interfered with their guidance computers. What should have been a precise orbital bombardment became random shots into a planet-sized storm system. Hurricane Patricia had been building strength in the Atlantic Ocean for 3 days under careful human guidance. Weather modification satellites had fed energy into the storm system until it became a monster that covered half the ocean. When General Zethkar ordered his landing forces to establish beachheads along the American coast, they flew directly into winds that could tear apart mountains. Colonel Tony Rivers commanded the defense of New York City from a bunker deep beneath Manhattan. His forces had spent 3 days turning the urban landscape into a three-dimensional killing field that would have impressed the ancient builders of medieval castles. Every street corner had become a potential ambush point, and every building was designed to funnel invaders into carefully planned death traps, the first alien dropships that managed to penetrate Earth's defensive storms landed in Central Park, expecting to find a clear area suitable for establishing a command post. Instead, they found themselves in terrain that had been turned into a nightmare of hidden explosives and concealed weapons positions. The trees themselves had been modified to collapse in specific patterns that would crush landing craft. Sam Parker crouched in a camouflaged position overlooking the alien landing zone with a weapon that would have made his ancestors proud. The rifle had been manufactured in a basement workshop using plans downloaded from the internet and materials bought at a hardware store. It fired bullets made from depleted uranium that could punch through alien armor like paper. The Velton ground forces advanced through the park using tactics that had worked perfectly on 47 other worlds. They moved in formation with heavy weapons providing covering fire while armored units cleared obstacles. What they encountered instead was an enemy that had learned warfare from a planet where everything was trying to kill them. Maria Gonzalez activated the satellite network from her control center in Colorado Springs, and suddenly the aliens found themselves fighting not just human defenders, but the planet's entire orbital infrastructure. Communication satellites became jamming stations that disrupted alien coordination. Weather satellites focused solar energy into concentrated beams that could melt armor plating. The aliens had never faced an enemy that would turn civilian infrastructure into military weapons. Shopping malls became fortresses with escalators that had been converted into conveyor belts for moving ammunition. Office buildings became sniper nests where accountants and teachers used hunting rifles to pick off alien soldiers from windows 50 floors above the street. Meanwhile, in space, Captain Jake Morrison and the surviving crew of the Defiant had linked up with every human vessel they could find. Commercial cargo ships, mining vessels, and even luxury yachts had been hastily armed with weapons salvaged from military depots. The improvised fleet struck at alien supply lines, using hit-and-run tactics that drove General Zethkar to distraction. The aliens discovered that human ships fought like their crews had nothing to lose because in many cases they didn't. Civilian captains rammed alien vessels with cargo haulers full of explosives. Mining ships used their industrial equipment to tear chunks out of enemy hulls. Even tourist spacecraft became suicide bombers when their crews decided that dying free was better than living as slaves. The turning point came when General Zethkar decided to demonstrate his power by landing a full division of troops in what his intelligence report said was a relatively safe area. The Amazon basin appeared to be mostly empty jungle with scattered primitive settlements. It seemed like the perfect place to establish a secure base of operations. Lieutenant Carlos Martinez was waiting for them with a force that included Brazilian special forces, soldiers, and indigenous warriors who knew the jungle better than anyone else knew their own homes. The terrain itself became an active participant in the battle as humans used their knowledge of the environment to turn paradise into hell. The alien soldiers found themselves fighting an enemy that could disappear into vegetation so thick that thermal sensors were useless. Poisonous plants that the humans had learned to avoid became weapons that could kill with a single touch. Rivers that looked safe to cross turned out to be filled with creatures that viewed alien armor as interesting new chew toys. Carlos Martinez had grown up in the Amazon and understood that the jungle was not just a place, but a living system that could be convinced to help those who knew how to ask politely. His forces moved through the trees like ghosts while the aliens stumbled through terrain that actively tried to kill them with every step. The Velton division that had entered the Amazon as a proud military formation emerged 3 days later as a broken and terrified remnant. Half their soldiers were missing, and the survivors told stories of a green hell where the trees themselves had eyes and the ground could swallow armored vehicles whole. General Zethkar watched the casualty reports with growing horror as his invasion force suffered losses at a rate that was unprecedented in Velton military history. For every human position his forces captured, they paid a price in blood that made victory meaningless. These Deathworlders fought like they had been born for war because they had been. General Zethkar stood in his command chamber staring at casualty reports that made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare. His invasion force had been fighting for 6 days and had lost more soldiers than in the previous 10 campaigns combined. The humans fought with a ferocity that defied logic and used tactics that seemed to come from the mind of a madman. The Velton High Command was demanding answers that Zethkar could not provide. How could a primitive species, without advanced weapons or shields, inflict such devastating losses on the galaxy's most powerful military force? The reports from the surface painted a picture of warfare so brutal and chaotic that even veteran commanders were requesting evacuation. Admiral Catherine Brooks received the transmission from the alien flagship just as dawn was breaking over the ruins of what had once been downtown Los Angeles. The message was simple and direct. General Zethkar was challenging humanity to send their greatest warrior to face him in single combat. If the human champion won, the aliens would withdraw. If Zethkar won, humanity would surrender. President Carter convened an emergency meeting in the Situation Room, deep beneath the White House. The alien challenge had been broadcast on every frequency, and the entire world was waiting for humanity's response. Military leaders argued about who should accept the challenge while politicians debated whether to trust an alien's word. Sergeant First Class Danny Murphy was cleaning his rifle in a bombed-out building in Detroit when he heard about the challenge on an emergency radio broadcast. He had been fighting aliens for 6 straight days with nothing but standard military equipment and the kind of stubborn determination that had kept his family alive through 3 generations of poverty and hardship. Danny was not the biggest soldier or the strongest fighter, but he had something that made him dangerous in ways the aliens could never understand. He had grown up in neighborhoods where survival meant learning to fight before you could walk properly. Every scar on his body told a story of refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. The decision was made, not in government offices or military headquarters, but in the hearts of ordinary people who understood what the challenge really meant. Danny Murphy volunteered not because he thought he could win, but because someone had to stand up and someone had to fight. The kid from Detroit who had never backed down from a bully was not about to start now. The combat zone was established. In the ruins of Times Square, where the wreckage of alien ships mixed with the debris of human buildings, General Zethkar descended from his flagship, wearing armor that could stop tank shells and carrying weapons that could level city blocks. He was 7 feet of engineered perfection built for war. Danny Murphy walked into the combat zone wearing standard military fatigues and carrying weapons that any human soldier would recognize. His rifle had been manufactured in a factory in Ohio, and his sidearm was the same model his grandfather had carried in Korea against alien technology that was centuries ahead of human capabilities. He brought only human courage and the refusal to surrender. The fight began with Zethkar demonstrating his superiority using energy weapons that carved chunks out of concrete and left glowing craters in the asphalt. Danny rolled and dodged using rubble for cover while his bullets sparked harmlessly off alien armor. To any objective observer, the outcome seemed inevitable, but Danny Murphy had not volunteered to win a fair fight. He had volunteered to represent humanity, and humanity had never been interested in fighting fair when survival was on the line. Every dirty trick he had learned in back-alley fights and every lesson from drill sergeants who had survived real wars became part of his arsenal. The alien general began to realize that his opponent was not trying to match his superior technology, but was using the environment itself as a weapon. Loose electrical cables became whips that could disrupt alien electronics. Broken glass became projectiles that could find gaps in armor. Even the rubble from destroyed buildings became tools. For someone who understood that everything could be a weapon, Danny used tactics that would have been considered cheating in any civilized conflict, but were perfectly normal for someone who had learned to fight on Earth. He threw sand to blind sensors struck from unexpected angles, and used his smaller size to hide in places where the large alien could not follow. Most importantly, he never stopped moving and never stopped fighting. The battle continued for hours with Danny taking hits that should have killed him but somehow staying on his feet through sheer determination. His rifle was destroyed and his equipment was scattered across the battlefield, but he kept fighting with improvised weapons and the kind of resourcefulness that only came from a lifetime of making do with less. General Zethkar found himself facing something he had never encountered in 3 centuries of warfare. His opponent should have been dead a dozen times over, but continued fighting with wounds that would have incapacitated any civilized being. The human warrior seemed to draw strength from pain and become more dangerous as the fight continued. The end came when Danny managed to get close enough to use the one weapon no alien could defend against. Human unpredictability combined with desperate courage allowed him to disable the general's armor with an improvised explosive device made from materials found in the rubble. When the smoke cleared, Zethkar lay defeated on the broken asphalt, but Danny Murphy did not kill his fallen opponent. Instead, he extended his hand and helped the alien general to his feet. The gesture was broadcast to both fleets and showed something that broke the Veltan understanding of warfare. These humans were capable of both extreme violence and unexpected mercy. General Zethkar looked into the eyes of the battered human warrior and saw something that changed his entire worldview. This was not a primitive savage, but a representative of a species that had learned to combine the ferocity of predators with the compassion of protectors. For the first time in his military career, he knelt before another being, not in defeat but in respect. The peace treaty was signed aboard the human flagship with representatives from both species working to establish the first alliance between Earth and the Veltan Empire. Captain Morrison was promoted to admiral and given command of humanity's first diplomatic mission to the galactic community. The final scene showed Earth taking its place among the stars, not as conquerors but as the galaxy's new peacekeepers. Other species learned that humans were too dangerous to fight and too valuable to oppose. Admiral Morrison's words to the Galactic Council became the foundation of human diplomacy for generations to come. We didn't come to the stars to kneel before anyone. We came to stand together as equals. And if that's not acceptable to you, then you're welcome to try making us kneel. Just remember, we're the species that made friends with wolves and turned them into dogs. Imagine what we'll do with civilizations that choose to be our allies instead of our enemies.